What do you think is the role of emotion in the human mind, in the human condition? Because we've talked several times in different ways that emotion matters and it's a big part of who we are. But why is it there? Why is it useful? What's good about it? We've almost said it's almost like a negative thing that we just have to live with. But why is it also maybe a beautiful thing?
Yeah. Well, I think you said, what's the role of emotion? I think emotion is the king, if we want to use that analogy. It's the CEO, if we want to use that analogy, right? Emotion rules all. We're taught that we're logical creatures, but we have innumerable pieces of data, even over the course of just a day, let alone a human experience, to tell us that is not the truth. Is it ever logical to run into a burning building? No. Right? I mean, logic's never going to tell one to do that. Okay, someone you love is in the building. The person's already sprinted halfway to the building, right? Emotion rules us. And so the thought, a thought is some of that is evolutionary, right? That strong negative emotion stays with us very, very profoundly, right? So example I'll give is if we're hunter-gatherers and like I find a new berry and it tastes good and it seems nutritious, and it is, right? Everything is fine. It'd be good to remember that, right? But if I find a new berry and it tastes good and it seems nutritious and we both eat it and almost die of sickness, we better remember that, right? So the primacy of emotion is in us for reasons that are about survival, that the emotion of it's my child in that building or my loved one is why I don't give a damn about logic and run into the building, right? The emotion of I thought that was good and I got really sick and I better never forget is also about survival. And the same applies to humans. If we're from different tribes back then, and in my tribe, when you put your hand out, it's a greeting. Mm-hmm. In your tribe, if someone puts their hand out, it means, hey, I'm going to attack you and take your stuff. Right? Then I put my hand out and you slug me, right? Then it's like, I better remember that, right? But you see how that can lead into, are the constructs around that. I say, oh, people in your tribe are violent, right? Right? We start then to make stories around that. But the primacy of emotion, whether it's berries or it's humans who might threaten us or it's humans we love, I think it's hard to even look at the anthropological, psychological literature to look at what's out there, and I think the face validity. And that's part of survival. Right, it's part of survival.
Well, it's so cool that you get also things like love, which are not often rational or grounded in logic and so on. If you look like sort of from a transactional perspective, a lot of times falling in love, or whether it's with friends or friendship or romantic love, it doesn't really make sense. I'm still not sure what the hell it is. Because, like, I mean, it's the thing that it's one of the things, or love for your kids when they're born, right? Like that love, the parental love. What is that? That's so cool that we get to have that. Like, if you're looking for in the menu of items that give life meaning, that seems like a pretty good one.
Yeah. So my response, you just said that gives life meaning. My response initially was going to be, it's the meaning of life, right? Because saying, okay, emotion is about survival, that's one part, right? And it's a very important part, right? If we don't survive, then we're not there to have emotions, right? So yes, it's about survival, but as important as that is, that's the small part of it, right? I think it is about the meaning of life because it's about the beyond self. And I think it relates back to what we're talking about at the very beginning and the sort of levels of emergence, right? And when we feel love, we feel happiness because that person feels happiness, right? There's something that's so generative, so creative about that. Like we want to bring order to things, and we happiness is consistent with simplicity, right? If we're healthy, there's nothing negative to say about our health, right? If we have health problems, there's a lot to say, right? And it's emotion that pushes us towards the goodness that I think makes all the meaning for us. I mean, it's interesting. I was wondering what your thoughts about this as a scientist, right? Because we accept it by and large that we have free will, right? We think, okay, we have free will, but then we get upset that there's not justice, right? So, but how is it like if we have free will, I could act in an unjust way, and then you're surprised, or vice versa? Like why, right? We have these thoughts because I think because we're rooted. We want logic to rule. Like there's a way in which I can understand logic, I can manage it, I can manipulate it. We sort of want it to be that way. So then we glorify logic, and then we misapply it, like ideas like, oh, I know we have free will, but I'm now, shaking my fist at the heavens because there's no justice, right? And I think maybe what we're looking for is we should go back and look at the givens. Like, why is there's only goodness if there's justice? I mean, that doesn't make, I think the goodness, why does the goodness have to be tied to that, right? Maybe it goes back to the counter entropy and the fact that when there is something, there is not nothing, right? And where there is something, there can be awareness, there can be goodness, there can be compassion, right?
Mhm.
Is it that what's really going on is not about justice? Yes, we have free will, but it's that goodness, creating, shoring up, making better, that is the meaning, that is the good, right? And that the evil is the destruction, as evidenced by the fact that it's overdetermined probably a million times that we're in this eddy current of counter entropy, and we could destroy that quite readily, right? And then we're nothingness, like everything else that we know of that's not us, that doesn't have the ability to do something that's creative or constructive. I mean, I think that that's the answer, and I think that our science really tells us that that's the answer. And I think it beckons us with ideas like, we know that things happen outside of space and time, right? They're physics experiments, right? Like we know this from the science of it, yet we don't stop and look and say, wait, is that the magic of the idea? Einstein said God doesn't play dice with the universe. I think, okay, maybe God doesn't play dice with the universe, that quantum indeterminacy and all of that is not just a flip of the coin, so to speak. But maybe it's in that indeterminacy that we're given the opportunity to assert ourselves, right? To make something one way or another. Maybe it's not God playing dice with the universe, but it's God loading the dice in our favor if we'll only listen to truth, the truth that being destructive doesn't help or soothe anything, even in the person who thinks it will for themselves, and that creativity and generativeness and kindness and compassion, like doesn't that seem sort of analogous to the eddy current of counter entropy that has us here in the first place? And I think that's where I pin meaning, and that meaning then, going back to the initial question, right, is generated in us through emotion, through what we feel that leads us to feel something that is mysterious, because I don't know why I feel it.
Yeah, in some sense, emotion is kind of the fuel of that creative imperative we have. But if you step back and look at the tapestry a little bit, it does seem that the creation and the destruction are the yin and yang of life. That it all works only if the main engine is towards creativity, but destruction also makes way for new things. So that's this kind of struggle. It seems like life is struggle between the different forces that make up the individual human, that make up society. All these tensions
Right.
are necessary for growth, for development. This kind of inner conflict and outer conflict are necessary for growth. It's not just in some sense, it's from the logic aspect. You kind of want everything to be perfect and just, for nobody to suffer, for everything to be perfect. But just like we talked about with trauma, it just seems like it's such a big, giant mess. What is it? Bukowski said, "Find what you love and let it kill you." There's some aspect of the negative aspect of passion and pursuit and obsession, and the turmoil of the pursuit of happiness, of the creative pursuits and all of that. I mean that's part of life as well. That's and I don't know what to do with that from an individual perspective in terms of figuring out how do you live a good life, how do you live a healthy life, because it does seem that a bit of hardship, or sometimes a lot of hardship, can make a pretty interesting life.
I think it brings us back to the discussion that we were having sort of before about like what does it mean, like the challenges of trauma, right, and of overcoming. And I think here we got to be careful with the language, right, because I would then say, let's take destruction, right, and separate it into two things, right. Like one is, you say destruction is like the breaking down, the tearing down of something, right, versus a process that has malice in it, right? So just like when we were talking about trauma and no, setbacks, things to overcome. We might say,
Sure.
okay, if you say, hey, you have it harder than the next person and you have more to overcome, or someone put a barrier in front of you for you to overcome, that there can be a lot of growth in that, including the times when you don't know if you, gosh, can I do this, right? Can I get over it, right? We're saying like that's challenge and something to overcome that's very positive. But we're saying, but there's no benefit of like throwing a racial slur in there, right? We're saying because that's all bad. Like that's not, even the prince says, I'm angry about that and I'm going to overcome that. It's like that didn't need to be, that didn't make anything better.
Mm.
If the person sees that and says, I'm gonna overcome that, it makes things less worse. Right?
Mhm.
Right? But there's no good to something that's created as destructive. We may look at forest fires, like look, controlled burns. You said there's a forest burning down, but that's okay. There's some we could say destruction there. There's a tearing down there, but it's in the service of the next fire not running through the community. The town that's on the other side of it. That's very different than a forest fire, say, started by arson.
Yeah.
Right. So you might say they're both a tearing down. They're a tearing down of the forest. But one is in the service of goodness, even though it's hurting the animals and the plants. It's not all good, right? But it's in the service of something as opposed to something else that's wantonly destructive. I think there's no good to the racial slur. There's no good to the arson, right? That's destruction in a way that's incorporating, I think, the malice of envy, something that's really purely, if there's a yin and yang,
Mhm.
that's the destructive, that's the badness end.
So racial slurs is a surface wave of a
Right.
deeper thing. And so, I mean, the reason I bring that up is like, all right, well, like you have these discussions of censorship. Like, what good does allowing racial slurs in public communication do, right? And it's like our communication would surely be better if we don't say bad things to each other. But it's like, it seems like the truth is our communication will be better if the amount of bad things is a small fraction of communication. That seems to be more true because another aspect of human nature with power, the moment you start censoring and removing bad words that everyone agrees are bad words, then the people at the top, they're doing the censoring, start getting greedy. It starts expanding, and this is the giant mess
Oh, I
of
agree
human
with you.
civilization where we can't.
Right.
The nice piles you created are kind of overlapping piles.
Oh,
That's the gray area.
yeah, I
That's the problem
agree.
with it.
No, I agree completely. There's a control of language. There's slippery slopes there. I think there's a very big problem there. So I agree. I think again, parsing out the language. I'm not saying, hey, we shouldn't have racial slurs,
Right.
as if like let's stop saying the words. I mean,
Yes.
the idea is the premise behind it, right? Like
Yes, I
the
got you.
prejudices. If we could eliminate the prejudice behind it, I was struck. I said I do almost nothing about medicine. I get to medical school and start with anatomy, right? And it's remarkable as to see as the bodies are being dissected that like we're all humans. Like it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter any of these things on the outside. Like, and that's true, not just like in our bodies, but in our minds. The part of the person that's not there, right? Because now we're trying to learn from the body, and it shows how ridiculous it is if you think that we're 99 point how many nines percent all alike genetically. And by the way, you only like take another tenth off and we're all orangutans, right?
Yeah.
So but somehow we have to see these differences between us, right? And where does that come from? And I believe that all comes from envy in that classical sense, that if I don't feel good enough, I'm going to want someone to feel better about. And sure, there can be visual things that that person looks different, right? Or you think about I spent some time in Great Britain, and when there was a lot of conflict in between Northern Ireland and Ireland, right? And you thought, wow, there's not even a look difference, right? It's the same general, religious umbrella, same ethnicity, right? But now there's some religious difference, and I thought it's not me trying to be denigrating, around the Irish conflict. It's like that's human. There's no actual difference between us. If I don't feel good about myself, I'm going to find one, right? It's that I believe could go away. It's driven by maybe the trauma of just being alive in the world and things can happen to us, but we certainly promote in the human created trauma, people feeling not good enough, finding differences. There's a place for the envy to attach, and we're off to the races of, wars. I mean, we're talking about the Second World War, and we think, what have we learned since then. It would take us a day to map out all the wars since then, right? Let alone, for goodness sakes, everything that's salient right now. So we're not good at learning from what seem to be some very salient lessons.